A boy learns to be a man by guessing the shape of a missing shadow. The guess becomes his identity. He learns the world through imitation, the rhythm of a voice that isn't there, the gravity of a hand he never felt. Every choice becomes an echo, half search, half defense. He grows tall, maybe successful, but somewhere beneath the practiced calm lives a quiet question. Who taught me to stay when it hurts and to stop when it's enough? Without a paternal counterforce, discipline is borrowed from fear or seduction from approval. The self gets outsourced to applause, to achievement, to someone's smile. The boy becomes a man of extremes, too controlled or too uncontained, always trying to prove what no one ever modeled. In Jungian terms, the father archetype isn't just a person. It's the inner map that defines distance and direction. The father is the horizon in the psyche, the figure who names where the boundary ends and where freedom begins. When that map is missing, the nervous system improvises. Rules come from survival, not wisdom. Order feels like threat and longing at the same time. Across cultures, the absent king leaves behind a kingdom of overgrown princes and exhausted queens. Boys grow into men who fear being soft and yet ache to be seen. Women carry double weight, trying to nurture and command at once. The tribe calls these men self-made, but the psyche knows better. No one initiates alone. If you look closely, you can feel this absence ripple through modern life. The man who can't stop performing strength, the one who folds the moment conflict enters the room, the charm that hides exhaustion, the rage that hides grief. What happens to children who grow up without their paternal father? Not just emotionally, but archetypally. When the outer father is gone, the inner one must be built from fragments: a teacher's fairness, a coach's steadiness, a stranger's integrity glimpsed in passing. The problem is, those fragments rarely fit cleanly. They shift under pressure. They keep him guessing. And so, many men live as if always being graded. The body flinches around correction. Praise feels like oxygen, withdrawal like punishment. He might not even call this wound. He'll call it motivation, drive, or standards. But behind the language sits the same prayer. Someone, please tell me I'm enough to rest. The paradox is that rebellion and obedience are twins. The man who won't be told what to do is still reacting to an invisible authority he hasn't met. Every defiance needs something to push against. Without that father energy, the push itself becomes home. If you've ever felt a tension between wanting guidance and fearing control, between craving structure and resenting it, that's the nervous system trying to parent itself. It's not pathology. It's a sign of intelligence born without mentorship. This is where the story begins, in the space where absence becomes architecture, where survival improvises a personality, where longing becomes a compass. In the minutes ahead, we'll follow that map through 5 landscapes: the father-shaped gap, the soft cage of being mothered but unmentored, the hunt for borrowed fathers, the mirror of women, and finally, the first clean no. Each one reveals how absence teaches, distorts, and eventually forges. Before we start, one breath. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight you carry that isn't entirely yours. You don't have to fix it right now. Just notice that you've been holding the line alone for a long time. The journey from fatherless boy to self-fathered man doesn't begin with doing. It begins with seeing. Seeing where the shadow was missing, and how, in reaching for it, you've already been trying to become it. There's a quiet pattern that runs through the lives of men who grew up without a steady father. It's not always visible in childhood, but it shapes how they work, love, and lead. Approval becomes currency. Criticism, even gentle, can feel like exile. Every authority figure, a teacher, a boss, a cop, a mentor, becomes a screen for a hungry projection. Part of him idolizes them. Another part resents them for holding what he never received, the power to name what's good enough. In Jungian language, this is the wounded relationship to the father archetype. The father archetype isn't just the biological man, it's the inner lawgiver, the one who offers a sense of horizon. It says, here is the edge of the map, and here is where you can walk freely. When that image is missing, the psyche builds its own from survival instinct. The nervous system writes rules out of fear, not wisdom. It says, I'll be safe if I never need anyone, or I'll be loved if I never disappoint. Both are contracts made in loneliness. Attachment theory helps decode this. Without a reliable father figure, the child's system swings between anxious and avoidant poles. He learns to anticipate rejection and overcompensate through achievement. Or he detaches completely, believing connection only leads to pain. The body becomes a soldier guarding an invisible border. Rebellion and obedience, though they look opposite, are twins. The man who insists no one can tell him what to do is still defined by the idea of being told. His freedom depends on resisting control, so he never learns the peace of self-direction. Jung would say he's trapped in opposition to the archetype instead of embodying it. The father he never met becomes a ghost. He keeps wrestling in every authority that enters his life. Imagine Odysseus without Ithaca. Brilliant, cunning, resourceful, but drifting. The storms aren't random. They're symptoms of disorientation. When you have no true north, movement becomes identity. Many men today live as wandering strategists, busy, competent, respected, but internally unanchored. They know how to survive, not how to arrive. If you pay attention, you'll see how this absence surfaces in small, physical ways. The micro-flinch when someone corrects you, the tightening of the jaw when you hear no, the defensive smile when someone offers advice. The body doesn't know it's safe to learn. It remembers every correction as potential abandonment, and yet, within that flinch lives the invitation to grow an inner father, a presence that can hold feedback without collapsing. Not a critic, but a compass. The father archetype in its mature form doesn't command, it calibrates. It says, you can stand here, you can face what's true. Science echoes this archetypal truth. The prefrontal cortex, which governs regulation and foresight, matures through mirroring. When a father figure models steadiness under stress, the child's brain learns to integrate intensity without panic. Without that mirror, self-regulation must be built later by conscious practice. It's not weakness, it's delayed architecture. There's a reason so many men alternate between harsh self-discipline and hidden chaos. They're trying to recreate external containment inside their own nervous system. When they push too hard, they become the punitive father they never wanted. When they surrender too fully, they regress into the child who still needs one. Integration begins when the two meet, discipline with warmth, firmness with mercy. If you've ever noticed that peace feels suspicious, that calm feels like the moment before rejection, that's the map of father absent speaking. It's not brokenness, it's conditioning, and what's conditioned can be retrained. Take a slow breath. Picture a compass settling after being shaken. The needle doesn't find north through effort, it does it by stillness. That's what the psyche longs for when the father is missing, a place where direction arises from within, not imposed from above. The father-shaped gap isn't just loss, it's also potential. Absence becomes the space where maturity can emerge by choice rather than inheritance. When you begin to fill that space with awareness, boundaries stop feeling like punishment and start feeling like home. This is where the journey turns, because when the boy grows up without a father, often he grows up surrounded by care, but not by mentorship. And that care, if left unbalanced, becomes its own kind of cage. When the father's presence disappears, the mother's love often expands to fill the vacuum. She becomes everything: comfort, conscience, confidant, sometimes even compass. For a boy, this can feel like devotion in its purest form. But over time, it can shape a nervous system that equates safety with merging and guilt with separation. Boundaries start to feel like betrayal. The result is a quiet paradox. The man who seems kind, accommodating, emotionally available, but inside he's exhausted from constant adjustment. He reads every shift in tone like weather. His attunement, once a gift of survival, becomes a leash he hands others. Jung might call this an inflated anima complex, the inner feminine dominating the masculine principle. In modern language, it's the nervous system trading truth for connection. Dr. Zhao Gabor Mate describes this pattern clearly. When a child senses that authenticity threatens attachment, the body chooses attachment. It's a brilliant adaptation in childhood, but in adulthood, it turns into diplomacy instead of honesty. Tenderness without edge becomes control disguised as care. He pleases not because he wants to, but because he fears what distance might mean. He learns to charm, to soothe, to apologize before conflict even arrives. He becomes fluent in emotional weather but illiterate in his own needs. Every no feels like an earthquake. He might even pride himself on being the good guy, not realizing that his goodness is often a shield against abandonment. This dynamic is everywhere. The partner who cannot say what he wants until resentment forces it out sideways. The employee who over-delivers then disappears. The man who mistakes compliance for peace. He's been mothered, but never mentored. Loved, but not initiated. Guided towards sensitivity, but not towards sovereignty. The culture praises this softness, calling it emotional intelligence. But without inner structure, its fragility dressed as virtue. It lacks the paternal counterforce, the energy that says, your feelings matter, but they don't rule you. Without that edge, affection can become manipulation, and kindness, a way of staying small. You can feel this pattern in the body. Notice how conflict registers as nausea, not anger. How saying no feels unsafe, not impolite. That's the imprint of enmeshment. The body still assumes survival depends on harmony. Underneath the politeness, there's fear. Fear that autonomy equals abandonment. In mythic language, it's the prince in Sleeping Beauty, surrounded by comfort, shielded from danger, loved beyond measure, but never tested. His castle is both gift and cage. Without the rite of passage, his softness calcifies into passivity. Comfort becomes a slow kind of paralysis. Jung would say the individuation process demands polarity. The masculine and feminine within each psyche must learn to dance, not devour. When one dominates, especially the mother archetype, the psyche loses its vertical axis. Everything becomes relational, nothing directional. The man floats between pleasing and resenting, performing closeness but starving for authority. Dr. Mate might call this the trauma of adaptation. What saved him as a child now limits him as an adult. But trauma isn't destiny. It's the story of what the body did to survive. The same sensitivity that once guarded connection can, when reclaimed, become empathy guided by integrity. There's a simple truth here. Love without boundaries breeds dependence, not intimacy. Boundaries are not walls. They are the frame that lets tenderness endure. To be mentored is to be shaped by friction, not consumed by it. So the work of growing beyond this soft cage isn't about rejecting care. It's about inviting guidance that introduces resistance, the kind that strengthens, not shames. In Jungian terms, it's how the inner father begins to awaken through friction, through the first moments of saying, I can stay connected and still be separate. When that balance starts to form, relationships change texture. Connection stops feeling like self-erasure. Tenderness stops being a strategy. The man who was once over-adapted learns that love can survive truth. Still, most don't reach this equilibrium alone. Having grown up without a father, they go searching for substitutes, places to borrow backbone, systems to outsource certainty. Coaches, creeds, leaders, and hierarchies step in to fill the void. And that's where the story goes next. The rise of borrowed fathers and the price of their approval. When a boy grows up without a father, the psyche doesn't stop searching for one. It just changes where it looks. Authority becomes a scavenger hunt. A coach, a boss, a political figure, a spiritual teacher, a brotherhood. Someone who seems to carry the structure he never received. At first, this can feel like salvation. Belonging replaces direction. Rules replace confusion. Finally, someone sets the line between chaos and order. But beneath that relief sits a quieter truth. Borrowed fathers always send a bill. Jung called this transference, the projection of unfinished relationships onto new figures. The nervous system treats mentors, bosses, or leaders as stand-ins for the missing parent. The longing for approval and the fear of judgment merge into worship. A man starts to live by proxy, building his worth through the eyes of whoever seems stronger. This isn't just psychological, it's biological. As trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk writes, the body keeps the score. It repeats unfinished stories, hoping to complete them. If the original wound was neglect, the body seeks discipline. If the wound was domination, it seeks control. Either way, rigid systems feel like safety because unpredictability has always meant danger. That's why so many men become addicted to structure. The gym routine, the military order, the corporate hierarchy, the religion of self-improvement. These worlds offer edges where there used to be fog, yet what feels like empowerment can also be anesthesia. Performing certainty avoids the risk of becoming it. Discipline can be a hiding place. It provides the illusion of mastery while keeping the deeper vulnerability untouched. The man who trains daily, meditates, or grinds at work may still be chasing the same blessing. Tell me I'm good enough to rest. Until that hunger is named, every system becomes another form of servitude. In mythic terms, it's Star Wars without Obi-Wan. The galaxy fills with false fathers, charismatic, commanding, incomplete. Darths multiply. Each offers power without integration. And power without integration always costs the soul. Modern life feeds this pattern. The corporate world rewards obedience disguised as loyalty. Spiritual movements reward surrender disguised as humility. Fitness culture rewards punishment disguised as virtue. All of them echo the same wound. The man who fears his own authority seeks it through others. The result is a private hollowness that success cannot fill. Promotions, belts, ranks, titles. They prove capability but not identity. Because what's missing isn't validation, it's initiation. One teaches performance, the other teaches presence. You can sense when a borrowed father is guiding your choices. There's a subtle tension between pride and dependency. Achievements feel necessary but never nourishing. The praise lands, but it evaporates. The approval has to be earned again tomorrow. Jung would say that the father archetype, when externalized, becomes tyrannical. It rules through fear or debt. Only when internalized does it become wise, an inner compass rather than an outer judge. The man who learns to hold his own authority no longer needs to rebel or submit. He can simply stand. There's a quiet turning point that happens when a man begins to question why he follows a rule. Is it devotion, or is it fear of exclusion? Is it reverence, or dependence dressed as discipline? This inquiry doesn't reject mentorship. It matures it. A true mentor points you back to your own authority, not to his throne. When borrowed fathers fall away, it can feel like another loss. But beneath that collapse lies the space where authenticity can root. The man who no longer needs a ruler begins to hear his own rhythm. Structure becomes service, not servitude. As this integration deepens, something unexpected happens. The hunger for external validation often migrates into romantic life. The psyche turns toward women, hoping to find the reflection once sought in men. What began as the search for a father becomes the pursuit of the approving gaze of the feminine. And so the story continues, not with authority now, but with attraction. The next chapter takes us into that mirror, where desire and devotion intertwine with the echo of absence. When the hunger for guidance outlives the search for mentors, it often turns toward intimacy. The man who grew up without a father begins to seek steadiness through women. At first glance, it looks like love. In truth, it's a deeper archetypal longing, the hope that someone else's affection will complete what absence left unfinished. He looks for a woman to bless his masculinity, to assure him that he is capable, grounded, worthy. Romance becomes sacrament, not partnership. Each glance, each rejection, becomes a referendum on his legitimacy. When she admires him, he feels powerful. When she withdraws, he disappears. Jung described this as projection of the anima, the inner feminine image each man carries. In a healthy psyche, that inner figure inspires creativity and connection. But when it's unlived or wounded, it's cast onto real women who are asked to carry what the psyche has not integrated. The result is a cycle: idealization, rage, withdrawal. What looks like passion is often father hunger wearing perfume. The more chaotic she is, the more alive he feels. Her unpredictability matches the climate of his childhood, the emotional weather where love was unstable, attention uncertain, affection conditional. Intensity feels like home, calm feels foreign. The nervous system confuses adrenaline for intimacy. This is why relationships shaped by father absence often oscillate between worship and resentment. The man oscillates with them. He may say, "She makes me feel like myself," but what he really means is, "She mirrors the missing part I still haven't claimed." Her beauty, her emotion, her chaos, they all act as teachers of his inner feminine, yet he doesn't know he's enrolled in that lesson. Symbolically, it's the story of the sirens. They sing of belonging, promising safety through surrender, but the song leads to shipwreck. Each new romance feels fated, archetypal, the one. But in truth, it's repetition dressed as destiny. Until the inner father awakens, the man will keep steering his ship toward that same haunting melody. Neurology explains what myth already knew. Our bodies bond through familiarity, not health. The brain seeks what it recognizes, even if it hurts. So the pull toward the unpredictable woman isn't weakness. It's a reenactment of the nervous system's first script. Safety equals intensity. Affection equals instability. To rewrite this, awareness must precede choice. There's a tender irony here. The very sensitivity that draws him into emotional entanglements is also what can lead him out. When he learns to hold his own feelings without outsourcing them, he begins to meet the feminine within rather than project it outward. The anima becomes internal guide instead of external obsession. In Jung's framework, individuation happens when these opposites integrate. The masculine principle of direction and the feminine principle of depth learn to coexist. For the fatherless man, that meeting restores what absence fragmented. The inner feminine brings empathy and imagination. The inner masculine brings boundary and focus. Together, they form a mature heart, capable of passion without possession, of love without collapse. In daily life, this shift feels subtle but profound. Approval loses its grip. A partner's mood no longer dictates worth. Desire transforms from conquest into curiosity. Love becomes less about rescue, more about recognition. The man who once sought completion through romance begins to feel whole enough to meet another, not merge with her. The anima, once projected, now becomes muse. She inspires rather than consumes. Her chaos no longer threatens because it's recognized as a part of him, the living creativity he had long exiled. And so, where relationships once repeated wounds, they now reveal growth. But before this balance stabilizes, another threshold appears. The man must face his fear of conflict. Because for someone raised on emotional tightrope, saying no can feel like abandonment all over again. The next initiation is not about love or longing. It's about friction. The clean no is where the father archetype finally enters the body. Not as rule, but as recognition. Not as distance, but as dignity. Conflict has always carried danger for the fatherless man. When the early bond teaches that connection is fragile, disagreement feels like exile. The body learns that to stay loved, it must stay agreeable. Anger, assertion, even quiet refusal, each feels like a betrayal of the bond that once kept him safe. This is why saying no doesn't come from the throat. It comes from the nervous system. It shakes, sweats, tightens. The psyche doesn't read it as boundary. It reads it as risk. Yet this is precisely where initiation begins. The hidden wound here is fear of isolation. The child learned that dissent leads to distance, so as an adult he bends, accommodates, apologizes before the storm. But every time he abandons himself to keep peace, a small fracture widens inside. Over years, that fracture becomes fatigue, the quiet burnout of living by permission. In Jungian terms, this is the unintegrated father archetype, still waiting to be born within. The external father sets limits from the outside. The inner father learns to do so from conscience. When that archetype awakens, boundaries shift from aggression to self-recognition. Saying no longer means severing love. It means maintaining integrity inside it. Psychologically, this moment rewires the nervous system. Each act of self-definition teaches safety through authenticity rather than compliance. The prefrontal cortex begins to override the old survival code, proving that autonomy does not equal abandonment. It's not loud a voice that marks maturity, but steadiness under pressure. Strength, at its core, is continuity. It's the ability to stay present while not yielding, to remain connected without collapsing. The man who learns this stops oscillating between silence and explosion. He discovers the quiet authority of congruence. Imagine tempering a blade. The metal is heated, hammered, and cooled again. Without heat, it stays soft. Without hammer, it stays shapeless. Only through that rhythm, fire and rest, friction and release, does steel become trustworthy. The same alchemy happens in the psyche. Each honest boundary, each uncomfortable truth, forges inner metal. Dr. Gabor Mate would describe this as the nervous system remembering choice. Trauma made it reactive. Healing makes it responsive. The first time a man sets a limit and his hands still stop shaking, something profound occurs. The nervous system updates its map of safety. He no longer needs the world to stay gentle to feel grounded. The inner father has entered the room. Culturally, this moment is rare. Many men mistake defiance for strength and detachment for peace. But clean strength doesn't need an enemy. It doesn't need to win. It simply occupies its space with clarity. Boundaries, when rooted in love, invite mutual respect rather than fear. The transformation isn't glamorous. It happens in small moments, choosing honesty over appeasement, calm over collapse, direction over apology. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of restoration. The boy who once feared disapproval begins to feel the quiet permission of his own authority. There's humility in this phase. Setting boundaries without rage, holding space without retreat, repairing without groveling. These are initiations, not techniques. They forge a different kind of leadership, one that blends benevolence with backbone. And this is where the story circles back to its beginning. The child once shaped by absence starts to embody presence. The missing father is no longer an outer figure to chase, but an inner rhythm to inhabit. Notice this turning point. Rebellion softens into integrity. Obedience evolves into alignment. The line between strength and compassion blurs, forming something steadier. A man who can stay. That tremor after the first clean no? That's not fear anymore. That's birth. The sound of the inner father stepping into his rightful place, holding the line not as weapon, but as witness. This is how absence becomes initiation. This is how the cycle begins to close. The fatherless boy spends years building substitutes for initiation. He borrows certainty from discipline, identity from relationships, morality from approval. He rebels, then repents, then repeats, but none of it grants the one thing he's been missing: internal authority. When that authority finally begins to form, it feels less like conquest and more like coherence. The voice that once scolded becomes a compass. The body that once flinched begins to trust its own steadiness. Integration starts when boundary and benevolence share the same spine. Throughout this journey, each pattern had its purpose. Rebellion taught vitality, compliance taught empathy, dependence taught reflection, but each was incomplete without initiation, the sacred friction where the self learns its own shape. The absence of a father demanded that initiation come from within. Psychologically, this marks the turning from projection to embodiment. The man no longer hunts for models to imitate.
He begins to recognize that what he admired in others was already potential inside him, waiting for permission. Individuation, in Jung's sense, is this shift from chasing external validation to carrying internal direction. It is not a sudden revelation, but a slow rewiring. The nervous system learns that peace is not danger, that calm is not waiting for the next blow. The heart learns that love can coexist with limit.
The mind learns that identity is not something earned through performance. It's something revealed through consistency. Transformation unfolds quietly, from chasing permission to granting direction, from reenacting absence to embodying presence, from outsourcing standards to carrying them. The man who once sought fathers begins to father the world through example, not through dominance. You can see it in his posture. Shoulders that no longer brace for judgment, eyes that no longer scan for approval. His calm no longer depends on who's watching. He has inherited his own steadiness. The myth that began with the absent king ends with the forging of a sovereign heart, not a ruler over others, but a custodian of his own soul. The archetype has turned inward, forming a balance between firmness and tenderness, the dual lineage every mature psyche must claim. Like forging steel, this process isn't about avoiding the fire, but learning its rhythm. Heat, hammer, cool, challenge, reflection, rest. Each cycle strengthens what once felt fragile. Over time, the man becomes less reactive, more rooted, less concerned with being right, more devoted to being real. That's the quiet gift of growing up fatherless. What was missing becomes the material of mastery. Absence, once a wound, becomes a forge. Through the long labor of awareness, the boy's guess at manhood ripens into wisdom. In the end, initiation was never stolen. It was postponed until he was ready to hold it himself. The father he needed becomes the presence he now embodies.